Afternoon. Thank you for the patience. I know we're a few minutes behind. Today's news conference is going to actually involve two different cases. I'm not sure what the media alert stated. We have one that involves a fugitive, a high-profile case. The second one is an update on a historical case, and I don't want anybody to confuse that they have anything in common other than maybe the nature of the violation. They are not in any way related to each other. They're individual cases. And as you can see, I have the U.S. Marshal David Gonzalez here with me today. One of the things I want to point out just in the very beginning of this news conference is both the cases that we're going to be speaking about are exceptional examples of multi-jurisdictional work. You're going to find that there were numerous law enforcement organizations involved in both cases, local, state, and federal, and it was through the coordinated effort that really led to the results, the apprehensions, and the conclusion in both these cases. The first one I want to speak about, though, involves a high-profile fugitive. Some of you may remember a few months back, Maricopa County put out a top 10 list. We had made one arrest previously on that top 10 list of most wanted fugitives in our county, and this one will involve another fugitive. The jurisdictions that were involved were the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, the FBI, the U.S. Marshal's Office, Homeland Security, and the Arizona Attorney General's Office. The person in question, you can go ahead and put the next slide on there for me, G. He was wanted on sexual exploitation of a minor, 10 counts. This case originated in 2017, and it is what we would describe as a proactive case, meaning we had not received information that a crime had occurred. Our cyber crimes detectives, who did an exceptional job, they actually proactively track data and information on the internet that is accessed related to images or other unlawful materials involving exploitation of children. So they had tracked information that led them to a residence in Mesa, Arizona, where they conducted a search warrant. During that search warrant, they acquired a considerable amount of evidence, technology pieces, and other items. And after forensic review, they identified the suspect. Well, we were able to obtain a grand jury warrant, and when they attempted to apprehend the suspect, we could not find him. This story is extremely impressive. Is the only way I could describe it. He was in Vietnam, and he had gone to get some additional pages. He had gone to the embassy because he needed some additional pages for his passport. And while there, their security detail did a check and found out that he was wanted in the United States. Historically, and U.S. Marshal Gonzalez will speak more about this, that is not a country that we have a relationship with where we oftentimes see them work with us on bringing criminals back to the United States territory. But through the work of the U.S. Marshal's Office and some of the agencies that I described, they worked with law enforcement in Vietnam. So initially, he was in Hanoi, correct? And then once he was no longer in the embassy and they were tracking him, they ended up locating him in, help me out here, David? Ho Chi Minh, yes, thank you. So they apprehended him, took him into custody. His passport was taken, he was transferred to Guam, and now he is in California just waiting to be brought back to Arizona. He's there just through a quarantine for COVID. But it is amazing to think that the long arm of the law reached across, basically halfway across the world with the hard work by the U.S. Marshal's Office, the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, and other agencies that I described to get a predator off the street who was targeting children. So I want to give U.S. Marshal Gonzalez a chance to speak a little bit about the work that they put into it, and then we'll answer some questions on this before we go to the case. But I have to, again, acknowledge the hard work by the detectives, the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, from inception, our FATE detail, the Department of Justice, ICE, and the U.S. Marshal's Office for all working collectively to bring a predator from our country who had fled to another country back to home soil so that he can be held accountable and prosecuted for his crimes. David?
Thank you. Hi, I'm David Gonzalez, as mentioned, the U.S. Marshal for the District of Arizona. And as the Sheriff mentioned, this is a very, very unusual case where getting somebody, a fugitive, out of a country like Vietnam is very unusual. I've been the marshal for 19 years now, and I'm not aware of any other fugitive that that the government assisted the U.S. government in removing a fugitive. In this particular case, the fugitive Wade Astle went to the American consulate in Ho Chi Minh, and as the sheriff mentioned, he had some issue with his passport, visa. The consular officer that discovered that he was wanted in Maricopa County for sexual exploitation of a minor. And not having arrest powers, the U.S. And the U.S. not having an extradition treaty with Vietnam, Astle was released by the consulate, but the consulate officer was wise enough to set up future meetings down the road to keep him close and to know where his whereabouts were. The consulate then notified the Minister of Public Security, MPS, that is a national federal police force in Vietnam, and gave information on Astle and his background. There was some obvious concern that in addition to being a fugitive, Astle might be involved in exploitation of children in Vietnam and other nearby countries. On August 21st of 2020, the Maricopa County Sheriff made a case referral to the Marshal Service. These referrals are common in where a fugitive has left the state or the country to avoid prosecution. My office, in coordination with the Department of Justice in Washington, began coordinating with the Minister of Public Security in Vietnam for the return of Astle to Maricopa County. On the early morning of October 20th, Astle was arrested by MPS officers in Ho Chi Minh City. At the time of arrest, Astle had a lot of computer equipment, computer tablets, USB devices, and portable storage cards, which would be concerning for individuals who are facing those kind of charges. And the area that in the country that he was in and nearby countries are known for a lot of that activity. Astle was transported by the Minister of Public Security officers to Ho Chi Minh City, to Hanoi, which is about 700 miles away. And on October 23rd, MPS transported Astle to the airport in Hanoi, and turned over to Deputy U.S. Marshals who had flown there on an aircraft that we chartered to bring him back. Primarily because obviously we were concerned about COVID issues and things like that. He was flown to Los Angeles, where he is currently housed at the Los Angeles County Jail, and should be returned shortly, and where Maricopa County Sheriff's Office deputies will pick him up and bring him back to Maricopa County to face charges. Thank you, Sheriff.
Any questions related to this particular case that either the marshal or I could answer? You're raising your hand, very polite, thank you.
Do you have an idea as far as the number of victims, child victims?
No, not as yet. So a lot of his material is actually child pornography in the exploitation, but the data is tremendous, both the initial and as the marshal spoke about, we have now additional data that we'll need to go through. We do know that some of the other locations that he traveled to, I think, was Thailand and Costa Rica. And again, areas that we're just concerned because it's not uncommon that those could be predatory spaces where children are targeted.
Sheriff, I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify a little bit. So I saw it's 10 charges. Part of it has to do with child pornography. Could you just elaborate, like, I don't know, I think you mentioned it was out of Lisa, a little bit more behind the story and these crimes that he's facing charges for?
Well, it's basically exploitation, where the majority of it is going to be images sharing child pornography with potentially other predators or receiving it from others who practice the same behaviors.
How long was he wanted for?
2017 was when the case was initiated, and it was either late 2017 or early 2018 when the grand jury indicted him, and since that time we've been trying to track him down.
And maybe some info on how he was busted.
Well, I think that the marshal covered the majority of those details there, but if you want him to reiterate any of the facts, he could do that for you.
Yeah. Basically, when he went to the American consulate in Ho Chi Minh City, the consulate officer ran his name through the databases that they had access to. And the consulate officer discovered the outstanding warrant out of Maricopa County. And that's when they knew, and the investigators that were tracking him, where he was. They obviously knew he was out of the country somewhere, but this narrowed him down to Vietnam, and specifically Ho City at that specific time. And that's when things started to come together and everyone started working together to hold him there and to arrest him. During that time, the Marshal Service and our counterparts in Washington, D.C. were making arrangements and just talking to the federal officials in Vietnam about holding him, how we can get him back. Since we don't have an extradition treaty, what they basically did is they deported him immediately and set up a time and date in Hanoi where the Marshal Service and the plane would meet them to take him into custody and get him to the United States.
Okay, I think what I was trying to clarify is there a task force that was like looking for anything online and then came across like him participating in illegal activity?
Yeah.
So, as I described earlier, so that is the proactive effort that takes place with our cyber crimes unit, and other law enforcement agencies do the same. They work with NCMEC, and what they try to do is determine what data is out there that is being transferred and track that data and see who the recipients are that are sharing any images or other items that are going to be a violation of law in of themselves, sexual exploitation of children, things of that matter. So our detectives were tracking this data. They found the data that led them to a location. We drew the search warrant, executed the location there, and that's when we recovered the physical evidence. And I have to say this before we move on to anything else, just expression of gratitude. I doubt very much anyone in Vietnam is watching this, but as Marshal Gonzalez had described to me, their support, their passion, their interest in having a healthy relationship with us to address issues of crime that affect our nation as well as their own, evolving into a new space to be more proactive, to work together to ensure that we have a good, healthy relationship. So they played a critical part in our ability to not only be aware of his presence, but then to track him and lead to the safe apprehension.
Why this? I mean, you can probably answer. Why this case out of all the other cases that, we don't have an extradition with Vietnam? Why this one? Because it was a victim, he victimized children. Like, why did they, I guess, help in this situation to bring him back?
Yeah, we believe it's two things. Once of all, the nature of the charges of child exploitation. The Vietnamese government officials don't want those individuals in their country either. And also, as mentioned, is the Vietnamese government is trying to have better relationships with the American government, especially when it comes to security issues. And we've seen signs along that line the last year or two. And this case is a perfect example where they went out of their way, and we got to give them our gratitude for the cooperation and working with everybody on this case, because I think it was a sign, I believe it's a sign to the American government that they want to work more closely on security issues.
Did any of the data originate from Arizona?
Well, twofold. First of all, I don't know firsthand, but secondly, a lot of the elements relative to the investigation, again, it was a grand jury indictment, so a lot of the evidence which has not yet been presented is still under seal.
I just wanted to confirm, he was initially spotted at the consulate in Ho Chi Minh, not the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi, is that right?
He was first in Hanoi, right, and then he was arrested in Ho Chi Minh, is that correct?
I think the first information we had, he was in Ho Chi Minh City at the consulate.
Okay, and that's when he was spotted?
Yes, and arrested.
Okay, and then what's the deal with the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi? He was just transferred there? I think it said it on the PowerPoint.
No, that's my understanding is that's where he went for the process for things that he needed for his passport, and that's when it was first identified that he was in fact wanted on a warrant out of the United States. So they kept in contact with him without alerting him of those elements, so that we could better track him as the marshal had described. And if once we got to the point where we could effect an arrest, we would have a safe opportunity to do so.
So does that mean he was arrested at the consulate in Ho Chi Minh?
I don't think it was
No, he
taken
was arrested at his residence in Ho Chi Minh City.
And at that time he was found, there was evidence that he was sharing this data from Vietnam as well?
That's not. I'm sorry. That's not yet determined.
Yeah.
We have physical items in our possession that we'll do forensic review of to determine if any of those additional crimes took place.
And last, if I could just have some more information on 2017 when you guys first tried to arrest him, why exactly didn't that work?
There was not an attempt to arrest at that time because it was an investigation, so they had to acquire the evidence, they do a forensic review, then they had to go to the grand jury to present their evidence to obtain the indictment. Oftentimes when you're dealing with technology, you have to be able to place the suspect on the keyboard at the time when the technology is used to commit these crimes. And short of a confession, then you're going to have to do some pretty extensive investigative work so that you can substantiate those charges. So that was the process.
So he wasn't indicted then?
No.
Is there any victims, I mean, that you're asking if you know this person, if they hung around any, you know, hung around any kids to come forward in this case here in Arizona? Or is this not a victim here in Arizona that you know of?
Well, I don't know that the detectives can speak to those elements of it as yet. As I said, it's still a grand jury indictment. But if anyone sees his face and is familiar and there were any actions that took place, because we know that predatory behaviors by sexual predators, that they oftentimes have a high volume of victims, please come forward, whether it be he or any other cases you have concerns over. Any other questions on this case before we give you the update on the previous one that I know some folks were interested in? All right, again, I have to express my gratitude to Marshal Gonzalez, to Department of Justice, to ICE, and all the other entities, to include the government of Vietnam, for their support in this effort. I'm sure you can grasp the gravity and the complexities of a circumstance like this, but as I stated earlier, to reach across the world to bring back a sexual predator, hold them accountable, shows the commitment of not only the deputies in the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, U.S. Marshals, and many others. So, thank you. Thank you, David. Appreciate it. Okay, the other case that we're going to just catch up on is related to Robert Incorvaia, I believe is the last name is pronounced. G, if you can put that slide up for me. This was a case that, if you remember, Maricopa County Sheriff's Office started an investigation involving a homeless person who had some mental limitations, mental illness and limitations, who had been a victim of sexual assault. He had picked up a homeless person, taken him to his residence, was involved in sexual assault and abuse thereof, and then returned that person back to the area, which I believe was around 19th Avenue in Northern. This was a case where, again, it was multi-jurisdictional, involved the Glendale Police Department and the Phoenix Police Department. Our number one concern, as I described in the previous case, is predators have oftentimes multiple victims. Therefore, we have to continue to work to not only locate potential victims, but to make sure that we can tie these cases together. As it stands right now, in the agencies, as I said, Phoenix PD, Glendale PD, the MCSO posse, who was highly involved in distributing information into that community, those neighborhoods, so if there were other victims, they would know how to contact us and that it was safe to come forward. And just the community at large, who was our greatest partner oftentimes. But as it stands in this case, there have been 12 victims who have been identified. We know that there's some other potential victims who have either not come forward or uncomfortable in coming forward, but we have 12 victims who are cooperating with law enforcement. It has led to 20 counts of sexual assault, which is a Class 2 felony, 11 counts of kidnapping, a Class 2 felony, 8 counts of aggravated assault, Class 6 felony, and then 6 counts of sexual exploitation, which is a Class 2 felony, and it is dangerous crimes against children, because I believe one of the victims in this case was a minor, and then there were some other additional charges. So our detectives, who again deserve incredible accolades, too frequently right now we're hearing things in law enforcement that overlook the great work that's done every day, and in this case is one of many oftentimes that deserves public recognition. But their dedication, their hard work and commitment to get sexual predators off the street and to make sure that we identify any victims possible has been exceptional. And right now we believe that his behaviors and his actions go back as far as 1990 until the present day when he was arrested. He is still in custody. So I can probably answer some questions on this case, but if not, we do have the captain and the supervisor in charge of the detail who maybe can speak about some things that are within reason and not going to undermine the efforts to prosecute the case. So any questions related to this case? And again, his target was homeless women, oftentimes those who had maybe some challenges, some mental health challenges. He would victimize them, he would take them to his home, he was physically abusive, and then return them back into the neighborhood.
You guys went into the neighborhood and were passing out flyers.
Correct.
Did any victims come forward because of those flyers?
Absolutely, and again, that was the efforts of the posse members, but we had other victims in the area who were familiar with him, who had been victimized, and reached out to our detectives to make sure that they participated in the prosecution and were recognized as victims in these cases.
That description of being homeless or having other mental illness?
Yeah, to my understanding, that was his primary MO. Now, there may be one or two, and I don't know if, Phil, are you here? you want to, or Dimitri, do you want to come up and just, you know, within parameters, answer maybe a few of these? You guys go and introduce yourselves too, so they know who you are.
Good afternoon. My name is Demetrius Whalen Gonzalez, and I'm a lieutenant with Major Crimes. And your question was? Yes, yeah. So homeless, mental illness, and homelessness was the common theme. And I think to the prior question, we had at least one victim that came out of the flyers from the posse. Say it again?
Since he was arrested back in August, do you know about how many more victims there were?
I think from the original brief, we've had 4 additional victims that we've charged on. There's other potential victims that we are still talking to, trying to figure out if they want to aid in prosecution. For obvious reasons, they're traumatized, so there might be more coming in the future, but there's 4 additional charged victims since our last press conference.
You said there were 12 victims cooperating with law enforcement, but do you have any idea how many total victims that you know of right now?
So we're going to go with 12.
How difficult is it to try to get victims to you know, have prosecution in a case like this? Obviously, you know of more that, you know, are kind of leery. Just how difficult is it to try to get them to be at ease with the process of, you know, courts and all, you know, and in the process?
Well, a lot of our victims are homeless. They have significant contact with police just based off their lifestyle. Some are very afraid of police or the sheriff's office, and we've had to kind of overcome that by making sure that, you know, if they do have active warrants, that we're not here about their warrants. We're here about, you know, this gentleman. And so, you know, after a couple contacts, they start to kind of open up. You know, we are checking sometimes under overpasses where they're known to hang out, or encampments. So it's a struggle, but, you know, I think we're making headway with at least the 12 that we have.
And I want to give, excuse me, for a second. I want to give clarity to, you know, and he's expressing it, and, you know, these two are the experts in this field. They do an exceptional job on a spectrum of different cases regarding sexual offenses. So when he speaks about the fear for law enforcement, first and foremost, as a victim, there are certain protections, and even if you are an undocumented immigrant, you are protected. But just due to the nature of a homeless person who oftentimes is encountering law enforcement in less than appealing circumstances, and they live a very difficult and hard life, there's just that uneasy relationship, you know, that can affect their willingness to come forward, or the fear of the unknown. So when we speak of those fears, it should never be because their fear of their status, their fear of circumstances, or any criminal activity they may have been involved in the past. As a victim, we want to protect you and make sure that whoever's responsible for the crime against you is prosecuted and held accountable. But it is, for the reasons as he described, a very, very challenging dynamic. So hope that answers your question.
Can you also speak as to why it's such a vulnerable population that he's targeting?
Well, you know, first and foremost, those who are homeless deal in circumstances where he's offering them things that are appealing. He's offering to bring them to his home where they'll have some shelter. He's offering them food or sometimes drugs or money. Is that correct, Captain? Yes. And so he is enticing them with things that just due to their circumstances oftentimes will cause them to make judgments that jeopardize their safety. And then once he gets them into a circumstance where he can be, they're vulnerable and he can take advantage of that and even physically abuse them, he does so. And when they're returned to the street, whether it is self-esteem, whether there's other factors, he knows that that population is less likely to come forward to work with law enforcement to report the crime itself. So he is truly targeting and victimizing what is one of the most vulnerable populations in our society.
Cooperating with police, I know, or law enforcement, I know at the last update we were told he wasn't.
Well, at this point, once he's incarcerated and he is assigned an attorney, then any cooperation or anything of that nature will go through his attorney. So normally what happens is we move forward with prosecution and they work on their defense. One more? Any more? All right, again, thank you very much, and to our, you know, to our deputies and to our law enforcement partners, cannot express enough gratitude. I think both these cases show the power of our efforts when there's multi-jurisdictional, and the community is our best partner in this. So thank you guys for making time to be with us today.
Good to see you, man. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.